Someone should have warned Yaz not to play the new Doctor Who Edge of Time game because apparently the reviews are terrible and now it gives you a weeping angel. Hello interwebs, I hope you're doing well because it is time to review the next episode of Doctor Who Flux, Series 13, Episode 3, Once Upon Time, which I will give it to them. That's a clever title. That's a clever title because it takes place upon time, but it's making fun of the phrase once upon a time. I see what you did there. I see what you did there, Chris Chibnall. I got your number. I get you. But before we get to my spoilerific review, because I don't even know how you could talk about the show doing non-spoilers at this point, so we're just going to go full bore into spoilers. But before we get to that fun bit, just a quick little brief reminder that the BBC, which helps produce and make the Doctor Who series that we're currently talking about, is currently embroiled in a controversy around an article that was incredibly harmful to the trans community, spread a bunch of misinformation, as well as platformed a woman who literally called for the genocide of transgender people. It's honestly very dark and very scary, and if you haven't heard about it and don't know the context of what I'm talking about, I've linked down in the description below a video by myself, as well as a video by a friend of mine named Council Geeks, who is also a Doctor Who YouTuber, that go into greater depth around the controversy and issues with it and why it's so scary for trans people. And it would be remiss of me, especially as a trans person, to not mention that when I do reviews of Doctor Who. But regardless, please check out those videos down below if you haven't heard about the controversy, because I think it's important to educate yourself on it because it's kind of very scary for the trans community at the moment because of things like this. But with all that not fun stuff out of the way, let's actually talk about the episode proper. This episode felt like an interesting middle ground between the first episode of this season and the second episode of this season because, like the first episode, there was a lot going on here, and I, number one, wasn't entirely sure why I was watching it, because it was sort of like, how is this connected to anything? How is this pushing the narrative forward? And it was sort of introducing a lot more elements and a lot more characters in an already somewhat overstuffed and over, narrativized, I guess is a word, a story. But there were also moments like the second episode where I was like, okay, I'm actually hooked into this story and I'm hooked into this, like, learning about the backstory of different characters and how it's sort of tying into, like, me emotionally investing in them, and also a little bit pushing about the backstory of the Flux and the Doctor and learning more about her sort of impossible child nature, which we were hinting at, which I'm glad, even though I don't love the impossible child, that it's getting some play here and some explanation here in this series, so at least it's feeling worthwhile and useful. And ultimately, it just left me feeling kind of a mixed bag, but mostly negative on it, because while I did enjoy some of the stuff here, it was all sort of like, but you have this big, grand, epic story going on, and I just kind of want that to be pushed forward and not have this, like, momentum-stopping episode that just feels like, yeah, it's giving me a little bit of cool stories that I like, and it's helping me invest in some new characters that we've had introduced, namely Vinder, and I enjoyed that stuff, but it ultimately feels very, just, again, momentum stopping and just adding more convoluted stuff onto an already convoluted story. But with that sort of as the overview, let's get into some of the specifics here, because the Doctor steps up onto the podium. She sort of takes it upon herself to try to save her friends by absorbing some of the energy of time. Very weird esoteric idea going on there, but I kind of got into it, and I got it that she saved their lives at the last moment by sort of putting herself on the pedestal. And that splits our crew into different time streams as they sort of go back throughout time and history, and also their own backstories, as well as the Doctor going into her own backstory and learning more about the Ravagers and this planet of time that we are upon. The two most superfluous stories of these were Dan and Yaz's storyline. Dan's storyline just felt like it was there to remind us that he has a friendship with Daphne, and I did like the creepy jumping around bits, but it reminded me a lot of, like, the episode Silence in the Library way back in the 10th Doctor's run, where we had Donna Noble jumping around to different moments and not remembering time, so it's sort of like, a remix of that idea, which tends to be something that Chris Chibnall likes to do, remixing old Doctor Who ideas. So again, it wasn't really particularly new. It didn't seem like it was pushing anything forward other than to, like, let us hook a little bit more emotionally into Dan, which is definitely needed. We need to be able to invest more in him and as a character, but it's just sort of there to remind us of his friendship with Daphne and remind us that he, like, has a life and that he's kind of a sad sack of a guy sometimes and has a little bit of bruises, but he's still a good guy at heart. Again, nice, but didn't really push the story forward there, and I already liked Dan the most out of all the characters that have been introduced here, so it was sort of like, okay, this is cool. I like Dan. I get it. Let's move on. And we also had Yaz's story, which felt like even the most superfluous of the bunch because she's just jumping around random moments of her life and we're not really hooking into anything specifically. She has this funny moment with her sister where they're playing apparently the episode, playing the Doctor Who Edge of Time video game, which gets her an angel stuck in her eye. And I like that idea of the image of an angel, is an angel coming back here and sort of tying into the cliffhanger of the next episode. But that just, mostly her story just felt like it was there to set up more stuff for future episodes and giving us a reminder of that stuff. Also, I should say in Dan's storyline, we got the Liverpool guy showing up again just to be like, hey, I'm still here, still kind of weird and crazy, but I promise you I'm going to show up at some point to do something. So both Yaz and Dan's storylines just mostly felt superfluous and just there to, again, set up more storylines down the road, which I'm sort of like, can we focus on one thing? But speaking of focusing on one thing, we also have Vinder's storyline, which I did think was the strongest story of the episode because I liked learning more about his character. I liked the little bits and pieces we've seen of him, but he was just sort of superfluous overall. And I liked getting this whole backstory that he worked for this great serpent organization and he was privy to an off-the-books conversation about a quid pro quo with the Supremacy, the guy who runs his organization, and so he, did the right thing and said, you need to file this, I need to be a whistleblower on this. And I like just seeing that backstory. It's very clearly, maybe I'm reading too much into this as an American, but knowing that Chris Chibnall likes to be very overtly political, this did read to me a little bit like the impeachment trial sort of thing happening with Donald Trump and people remaining silent under Donald Trump in different political eras, but not being so directly, overtly beat you on the head, bonk you on the head, overtly political as Chris Chibnall has tended to be over the last few seasons. I think of like him literally evoking Donald Trump a few times, and also the end of that one episode where he just rants about like climate change, which was just a little bit too on the nose and a little bit preachy. And so I like that this is a little bit more subtle in that, and it did enamor me to Vinder and see like, oh, this is a guy who stands up for his morals and principles. However, this also couples with the other story going on this episode, which was another storyline and another character being introduced here, which was Belle, this lady with her tamogachi running across time, fighting the Cybermen, Daleks, and everyone as time is being eaten. And I got that her story was mostly there to sort of show me what was going on in the universe as the Flux was tearing everyone down. I don't know why we couldn't have used Dan or Vinder or anyone else for that role to just show us the time stream going crazy and haywire. But hey, let's introduce another character in this overstuffed narrative. And so I didn't ultimately invest too much in her character because I'm sort of like, I get we're learning a little bit about the Flux, but I don't really care about her. And ultimately, at the end, we learn that she is Vinder's girlfriend, lover, wife, something like that. And I'm just left here being like, okay, so now Vinder's going off on his own to look for her, but why do I care? Why was Vinder here at all? Why do I care about, like, Belle's story? I get that we're trying to show, like, the consequences of the universe falling in on itself, and maybe that's enough, but it just feels like there's already too much going on here, so why are we following now Vinder and Belle going off on their own thing when I barely care about these characters at all with the already overstuffed narrative? So it was just kind of frustrating to see that, and I understand some of the narrative function, but it's just sort of too much and too little of time. But speaking of time, though, this brings us to the last storyline, which is probably the most pertinent to the story overall, because we have the Doctor going back in time to the planet of time, where she was working with the Division, that sort of impossible child-like sector that we saw that she was working with at the end of last season, the sort of Time Lord team that went off and did their own stuff. And so she's assaulting the Ravagers who have taken over this Temple of Time and are trying to destroy all of time. So we're learning a little bit more about their history, and it was cool to see the Doctor in the body of the fugitive Doctor, Jo Martin, back here. I would have liked to see Jo Martin actually perform the role more instead of her just popping in at moments. I like Jo Martin's Doctor quite a bit. I mean, I like Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, but anytime I can get a little bit more time with Jo Martin's Doctor is just nice to see, and so I would have liked to see her a little bit more. But it was cool to get a little bit more understanding that I guess the Ravagers are these poisons to time, and the Flux is also a way to destroy time, and so the Flux and the Ravagers have both been introduced into this universe to help destroy it by some old lady who we see at the end of the Doctor's memories, who is just there to destroy the universe, and apparently the Doctor's the cause of it. So it's difficult for me to say this is good or bad, because it's building upon a lot of stuff that we've built up the last few episodes, and I got it, but it's also just kind of nebulous, and I don't know why I care too much. It's just backstory for the Doctor that just gets very convoluted, I guess is the best way to put it, because then we don't really know much about the Ravagers other than, I guess, they're time poisons. But why are they so angry about like killing everybody? It's just what they wish to do, and then they have a resentment at the Doctor for tearing them down. And then we also get this whole thing about the prisoner, or the passenger I should say, which is a living prison, which is a cool idea that the Doctor used to sneak in the Atropos who are able to save time and sort of take control of time. So I guess the whole idea is that time in this universe at this moment was not really under control, and so the Doctor, using the Atropos, helped to control time in this universe, but now the Flux and the Ravagers are here to tear it down again, and it's a war between time and space. Very esoteric concept, and very just difficult to wrap my brain around emotionally. I get it kind of, mentally in my head, but it's just a lot to... I'm just not really invested in it, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm just not emotionally invested in this whole conflict. And it's just because it's so convoluted and there's no character I'm really hooking into, it ultimately feels very frustrating. I think the strongest moment for me in the episode was the Doctor yelling about how she just wanted to see more of her memories. That actually worked for me because I get that the Doctor would want to see more of her memories, and her being frustrated at that and even lashing out at Yaz in the last few moments of the episode when she's just got so much to do. And so that resonated with me, but ultimately at the end of the day, I just am not really emotionally hooking into this story or really any of the stories going on. And that's ultimately where I'm coming down on this episode, because half of this episode just, again, felt like it was nudging forward storylines or reminding us that storylines were going on. And then we were getting backstories for characters that I'm not entirely sure why I need to care about them. I like them. I like Vinder. I like Bell. They seem okay. But I'm not sure why they're here or what we need them for, and ultimately what they're in service of. And it's ultimately kind of forcing me to not emotionally invest too much in their stories. And then the storyline that is most pertinent to the plot is so convoluted and ultimately devoid of anything integral for me to really hook into besides these big esoteric concepts, that I'm ultimately just not really hooking into this episode. I'm just sort of sitting here being like, I'm just not emotionally engaged with this. And I think that's ultimately how I'm going to wrap out this review. It's ultimately too much going on, too convoluted, too many things happening all at once, and it's just preventing me from being able to really engage, emotionally invest in this story. And I'm really worried that that's just going to be indicative of the rest of this series going forward. We only have 3 more episodes. We're halfway through the season, and if I'm not hooked in by now, that's a bad sign for the rest of the series. And yes, I know some people say, oh, it's a story told by chapters. We're only in the middle of it. Maybe I'll feel different at the end, and that is possible. But if I'm just sitting here for an entire hour just watching this and not critically or not emotionally engaging with it, then I'm just feel like it's a waste of an hour. And yeah, maybe I'll look back on it 3 weeks from now and realize it was this big revelatory thing and how wonderful it all ties together. But as I sit right now, I have to say, I just did not feel really invested in the last hour of my life with this story. And that's ultimately means I don't feel like it was a good episode. So while there were good things within this, unfortunately, I have to give this one a definite negative review. But I'd love to hear all of your thoughts in the down below. Did you like this one? Are you a little bit more up on it than I am? Because I'd love to hear all of that in the comments. No, I hate giving negative reviews. Y'all know that about me. I don't like talking about things that I don't like. I will give negative reviews, but I just don't like talking about them necessarily. So it's a bit upsetting. So I would like to hear if you're having a good time with it. But beyond all of that, don't forget to subscribe, like, all that stuff. And I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.